All right, so in this video, we get to finally start our full stack FastAPI application. Now, before we dive in, there's one thing I want to cover, and that's because our MySQL directory will not be in the starting files for this project. So when you go and check out the starting files for this project, whether that's in the resources of this video or in the Git repository, you will see that there is no MySQL directory, and that's just going to hold our MySQL statement that I moved to a different area of the repository. So when you move this over and you see that there's no MySQL directory, that's totally fine. So let's go ahead and continue on, and let's build this full stack application. So the first thing we're going to need to do is create a new directory called templates. Now let's right click on templates and say new HTML file. And I'm going to name this HTML file home. So now inside our templates directory, we have one file called home.html. And now inside this title, I'm going to say FastAPI. And inside the body, I'm going to just have one h1 tag saying, welcome to this FastAPI course. We have our doc type as HTML. We have our HTML wrapper with language English. We have our header with a meta char set of UTF-8, a title of FastAPI, and a single body. With inside the body, we have our h1 tag saying, welcome to this FastAPI course. Now we definitely want this to be able to render. So let's hop on over to our routers todos.py file. And let's open up our terminal. So before we can proceed, we need to install a few more requirements. The first being AIO files. So pip install AIO files. And you may already have the requirement satisfied. It really depends on your virtual environment that you're using. And now let's also install JWT. And as you can also see, I already have this satisfied as well. But just remember, you need to install AIO files and JWT. Once those are installed, let's jump back over to our todos.py file. And let's import two new things from FastAPI. The first being from FastAPI.responses, import HTML response. The second being from FastAPI.templating, import JWT templates. And now right under models.base.metadata, let's create another one-liner, but this time we're defining a variable of templates to be equal to JWT templates, and then we have to point to the directory of where these JWT templates live, which is going to be the templates directory. And now under this to-do.base model, and right above our first API request, let's create a new request. Here I'm going to say router.get/test. And then I'm going to create a new function, which is async def. I'm just going to name the function test. And here as the parameters, we need to pass in request, which is of type request. And we're going to have to import that. So let's scroll back to the top, and from FastAPI, let's just import request after API router. And now let's go back down to our async def test function. And now let's do return templates.template response. And here, let's just say home.html, comma, request request in brackets. And really what this is your context. And we must return our request, remember requests and responses, back to the file that's going to be rendered. And I'll go over more information about what the context actually means. But for now, let's open up our terminal and let's type in unicorn main app -- reload. And from here, let's type in /todo/test. And look, there we have it. Welcome to this FastAPI course. This wraps up the first lecture on getting our templates directory rendering our first HTML file. And I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to create a static directory where we can set up our own CSS and JavaScript to our application. So the first thing we want to do is create a new directory under To-Do app, which is called static, and make sure you name it static. And now under static, we're going to create another directory called To-Do. And now under To-Do, we're going to create two directories, one for CSS and one for JavaScript. And inside our CSS directory, let's create a new CSS file called base.css. And as we can remember, we have one H tag. So let's modify this one H tag. We can do this by saying H1, curly brackets, and then saying color : red. All right, and now let's close these files. And let's jump on over to our main.py file. And remember, our main.py file is our main file for the application. It includes all the routing to our authentication file and our to-dos file. Right under our models.base meta file, we're going to have to import static files. But first, let's import it from the directory above. We can say from starlight.staticfiles import static files. Now under models.base, we now need to use a mounting technique to mount our static files to our application. And mounting means adding a completely independent application to a specific path that then takes care of handling everything under the path with the path operations declared in that sub-application. And that's quoting directly from the FastAPI documentation. We can do this by saying app.mount parentheses, double quotation marks, /static, comma, static files, and as the parameter, directory equals static, comma, name equals static. All right, now let's open up our terminal and restart our server. And we still get our exact same response of welcome to this FastAPI course. And that's because we need to import now our CSS styles into our HTML file. So if we go back to our application and we open up our home.html file, and inside the head, let's create a new link which refers to a style sheet which is of type text CSS, And here we're going to type in some funky looking code, but I'm going to go over this step by step. So href equals quotes, bracket, bracket, URL for, parentheses, single quotes static, comma, path equals, and here we're going to define the path to our CSS, which we already created. So from static, it's to do CSS base.css. All right, now let's go back to our web application and refresh the page. And there we have it. Welcome to this FastAPI course is now read. And now let's re-walk through everything we just did. We have our main.py file, which is using an app.mount to import our static directory. So our static directory, we're saying make sure we get everything from this static directory. And then inside our static directory, we have our /todo, we have our CSS and our JavaScript directory, which everything is empty, but really our CSS directory, which has our base.css file. Inside our base.css file, we have our h1 tag where we're changing the color to red. And inside our HTML file, we have one h1 tag which is going to change the color to red, and we had to import the link. So we have to import our styles, which is our base.css file, to be able to configure and add our CSS. And inside here, we have to use some FastAPI and Jinja specific verbiage to be able to say, from our root path of static, let's import to do CSS base.css. This wraps up the lecture on adding CSS to our templates in FastAPI, and I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to be moving some of our CSS and JavaScript files from our starter files over into our application. Now when you download the to-do app starting files, you're going to see that there's a static directory and a templates directory, which matches perfectly with our application. If we open up our static directory and we open up our to-dos, we're going to see a CSS and JavaScript with some files inside that we're going to need to move over. And this is mostly just Bootstrap, plus our base CSS file, which I added some configurations to. So let's grab both of our base and Bootstrap, copy them both, and let's just paste them in our CSS directory. It should tell us that there's already a base.css file in this directory, and that we should overwrite it. So now inside our base.css, we have a body, we have a couple different h tags, we have a main color, and a strike through. Our bootstrap.css should have a whole bunch of files regarding Bootstrap. And there's a couple different ways for you to get Bootstrap in your application, but I just went ahead and exported it to a directory just so we don't have as many issues when dealing with it in case different versions of Bootstrap comes out. And now we're going to have to do the exact same thing with our JS directory. So let's go back to to-do, open up our JS, and here we're going to see Bootstrap, jQuery, and Popper. We're going to grab all three of those, copy, and then just dump them into our JS directory. And this is going to have a whole bunch of stuff. So if we open up our Bootstrap JS, we should see a whole bunch of data. Our jQuery Slim should be fairly big, and our Popper JS should be fairly small, but it's going to have a lot of information. And these are the required files to get the Bootstrap JavaScript rendering properly. And Bootstrap is just a framework that allows us to deal with CSS and JavaScript extremely easy, as there's a whole bunch of pre-built components. Now if we open up our directory again, and we jump back to the main directory, there's also going to be a templates. Templates is going to have 5 different files that you can import into your templates file if you want. Now there's going to be a full guide and a quick guide. The quick guide is just going to be copying all of these over and to make sure they work. The full guide is we're going to go through and really create HTML file, home, login, register, edit, and add. And you're going to be able to code along with me as we manipulate the HTML and DOM to work properly with the to-do app. If you want to skip most of this and just deal with the complete FastAPI side, that's totally okay. And you can skip the next few sections until you see the quick guide for FastAPI and template rendering. Well, this wraps up this lecture on setting up our CSS and JavaScript. In the next few videos, we're going to jump into the DOM and start manipulating the home.html and creating the other 4 HTML files we need. This wraps up this lecture, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we will be going over Jinja and Jinja scripts. So what is Jinja? Jinja is a fast, expressive, and extensible templating language for creating full-stack web applications. Jinja is able to write code similar to Python in the DOM and by manipulating data. The template is passed data to render within the final document from Python. What are Jinja templating tags and scripts? Well, Jinja tags allow developers to be confident while working with backend data using tags that are similar to HTML. In the code image provided, we can see that the href is dynamically grabbing the CSS from the base.css in a specific path. This overall means Jinja is grabbing the relative path and configuring the CSS automatically. The double brackets and the URL path to CSS is extremely powerful and dynamic. Now imagine we have a list of to-dos that we receive from the database in the Python backend. In the example, we can see that the context object from todos.py and a for loop within home.html. For us to display all of the to-dos, we must loop through each to-do within the to-dos list and then print the to-do. The Jinja templating scripts allows us to do this easily. First, we have to pass in the list of to-dos from Python. In the context object, we are saying we want to create a variable called to-dos, which will hold the data of all of the data within the to-dos list. And then in the DOM, we want to loop through the list within the HTML file. We also have to specifically say when to end the for loop by saying end for. Another thing you might notice is that our for loop has double brackets and percent signs to start the for loop and to end the for loop. We can also use Jinja templating language with if-else statements. Again, we must use double brackets with percent signs to create an if-else statement. One thing that may stand out is the double brackets within the to-dos pipe length. As we can see here, a single bracket 2% signs means some type of control flow, loops, or logic, while a simple double brackets means a specific variable. We also have to end the if statement by specifically saying end if, just like we had to specifically end the for loop by saying end for. This gives us a simple overview of Jinja, so let's jump back into our to-do application so we can add some Jinja scripts to our web application. I'll see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to complete our home.html file to at least give us a professional looking static file before we start adding dynamic ability to it. So the first thing we need to do is add in another link This new link will point to the other CSS file, which is Bootstrap CSS. Currently, we have only the base CSS connected, so we need to do the same exact thing, but for bootstrap.css. So to start, we can just copy and paste this link. But let's just make sure we change this base.css to bootstrap.css. And now right under this meta charset UTF-8, we're going to want to create one more meta tag, but this is going to be a Bootstrap specific one, which will allow us to have a responsive web application. So let's start by saying meta within the tags, name equals viewport, content equals width equals device minus width, comma, initial dash scale equals 1, comma, shrink to fit equals no. And now let's change this title to do app. And that's just what displays at the top of our browser in the tab section when the application is rendered. And now let's come down to our body, and the first thing we want to do right above this Welcome to the FastAPI course is to create a div. And I'm going to do a couple spaces just so we can see the application better. So the first thing we want to do here is create a div. In a lot of IDEs, if you type in the word and then you do tab, it's going to automatically create both anchors on both ends. And now we need to do a nav, which stands for navigation, as we're going to be creating our navigation bar. And inside our nav tag, we want to say class equals navbar space navbar dash expand dash MD, which stands for medium. Navbar dash dark, main color and fixed to the top, which means we want this navbar to be stuck at the top of the application the entire time. And now inside the navbar, we want to make an anchor tag, which is going to really have the title of our application. So A, class equals navbar dash brand, href, and href means where the application will go when this button is clicked. Except for we're not going to have this link configured at the moment, so we're just going to have # or hashtag, and we're going to call it to do app. And now we're going to be creating a button. And the button is going to have a class of navbar toggler, type equals button, data toggle, which is collapse, data target, which is going to be pound navbar nav, area controls of navbar nav, area expanded equals false, and aria label equals toggle navigation. And inside the button, we're going to have a span. which is class equals navbar toggler dash icon. And now under the button, we're going to create a div, which is going to have a class of collapse space navbar dash collapse. With an ID of navbar nav. And inside the div, we're going to have a UL, which stands for unordered list, with a list and an anchor inside. So the UL, or the unordered list, is going to have a class of navbar nav. The list tag is going to have a class equal to nav-item base active. And our anchor tag is going to have a class of navlink with an href of just a pound or a hashtag that says home. All right, let's save this application and let's open up our file to see what happens. If we refresh our application, we can see that we have welcome to this FastAPI course with our to-do app and a home and a nav bar. If we inspect it and we shrink the application, we can see that we now get a little hamburger automatically. Now this doesn't do anything at this moment, but we can see that our application is becoming responsive based on the screen that we are associated with. Let's go back to our code. And under our nav bar, we're going to want to create another div. This with a class equal to container, which means spacing. So we're going to shrink this page after the nav bar. We're going to create a new CRUD text center. So let's create another div. This class is going to be equal to CRUD space text dash center. And inside this div, we're going to create another div of CRUD header. And we're going to say your to-dos. And now under this your to-dos div, let's create one more div, which is class of CRUD body. With an h5 tag of class CRUD title, list of your to-dos, with a small p tag with a CRUD text class that says information regarding stuff that needs to be complete. And also, we need to make sure our next thing is within our div. Let's do a couple spaces after our p tag to make sure we're inside our div. And here we're going to create a table. Now a table is just a list of ways to organize data. Let's make sure we have a class attached to our table of table hover. And within our table, we're going to saythead, which is our table headers. And inside our table headers, we're going to say tr, which stands for table row. And inside our table row, we're going to say th, which is the actual table header. We're going to say scope is call for column. And then we're going to say # as the first one. And then we're going to duplicate this 2 more times to change the information to info and actions. And now under the table header and before the table, we're going to create something called a table body. We can do this by saying tBody. Inside the table body, we're going to want to do a new table row, which has a class of pointer. And inside this TR, or table row, we want some table data. And this is what's going to actually present data to our table. So our first TD, or table data, is going to be 1. Our second table data is going to be take out the trash. And our third table data is going to have 2 buttons. One that's going to say complete and one that's going to say delete. So let's start by creating a button with a type is equal to button, and a class is button-success with complete. We're going to create another button, which is also of type button. This time the class is going to be button-danger, and the button name is going to be delete. And now let's copy and paste this entire table row 2 more times. Really all we're doing to make sure we have some data in our table. Let's change these numbers to 2 and 3. So we have a table, which is going to show 3 different headers. Inside those, we're going to have 3 different amounts of data. At the end of our table, we're going to create a anchor tag, which is going to have an href of # and a class that is equal to button space button primary, which says add a new to do. And then we can finally close off our 3 divs. And I'm going to remove our h1 tag that says welcome to this FastAPI course. And here, just like we did at the very top where we imported our CSS, we have to import our JavaScript. We can do this by saying script. And here within our script, we're just going to scroll back up here and take everything in this href path. Scroll back down. And right here, we're just going to say source equals what we just copied, which is going to be URL for static path, except for this is leading to our CSS stuff. We want to erase it back up to our JavaScript directory /jQuery-slim.js. We want to copy this entire script and do it again, but this time change it to popper.js. And then one last time for Bootstrap. And those JS files, again, are right here in our JS directory that we copied over. So Bootstrap, jQuery, and Popper. So make sure these names match this directly. It is also important to note that these 3 script tags must be in this order of jQuery first, Popper second, and Bootstrap as a 3rd script. Let's now save our application and let's open up our file. Let's refresh the application and voila! We have our home and our nav bar working properly. We have a card body with your to-dos. Inside, we are saying list of your to-dos, information regarding stuff that needs to be complete. We have our 3 table headers, which is a #, info, and actions. And then we have our table data and our table row. So our table is this entire thing. Our table row is each element going horizontal. And then inside each table row, we're saying table data, which is this one, take out the trash with the 2 buttons. Now, none of this stuff is actually working. We can make the screen smaller, and we can just remove this completely to make the screen big. None of the buttons are currently working, but we definitely have a professional looking to-do application for our home screen. All of this information is static though. Remember, that's the goal of this, is to make everything dynamic and eventually add login authentication and registration. So then each user will have their own table to keep track of their to-dos. This wraps up the full guide on creating our home.html page from scratch, and I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to be creating our add-to-do.html page. The first thing we need to do is head over to our templates directory and create a new HTML called add-to-do. Now inside our add-to-do, I'm going to delete all of the pre-generated code. And now a lot of the code is going to remain the same between add-to-do and home.html. The first thing we need to do, I'm going to close all this so we can see better, is everything that's above the container we need to grab and paste into our add-to-do, and everything under the container we need to grab and paste underneath the original thing we posted. So now automatically we're going to get the HTML files, we're going to have our header, which is going to say to-do app, already predefined with our CSS and our scripts at the bottom with our JavaScript and our nav bar. And the way I was able to minimize and maximize this line is in PyCharm. There's a little line that dictates this div, and everything inside this div is what's associated with the home.html. Now that we created our add-to-dos pretty much template, we now need to create its div container that's going to hold all of its information. So let's start by saying div with a class of container. And inside here, I'm going to say div class card. And inside the card div, I'm going to create another div of card header. With inside, make a new to-do. Now outside the card header, but still inside the card div, let's create another div of card body. And inside the card body, we're going to create a form, which is going to be where we submit our new to-dos in the future. And I'm going to remove the action for now. And now inside the form, we need a div, which is going to be a form group. With a label that's equal to title, and an input that's required that has type text, class form control, and its name is title. And required means that the browser will not allow you to submit the form unless this field input is filled out. And now under this div, I'm going to create another div of form group. With a label of description. And a text area of class form control over 3 rows with the name description and also required. And now one more div, which is going to be equal to class form group as well. With a label of priority. And we're going to say select. And we're going to make sure the name is priority and the class is form control. And inside the select, which is going to be a drop-down list, we need 5 different options, all 1 through 5. And now after this div of form control, but still inside the form, we need to create a button that will submit the form, which is going to have a type of submit with a class of button space button dash primary. And we're going to say add new to do. All right, so let's save this file. Let's jump back into our todos.py file, and let's just make sure this test site is going to render our add to do.html and not our home.html. Render up our server. Open up our web application and refresh the page. And voila, we see we have a make a new to do with a nav bar with a title, description, and a priority list that has a drop-down menu of 1 through 5 and an add new to do button. Again, the add new to do buttons don't work, and if these are blank, everything just says please fill out because we made all the fields required. Also, if we right-click and inspect, this will also be a responsive web application that shrinks to the size of the screen, with the hamburger that drops down and shows the navigation items. This wraps up the add to do HTML page, and I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to learn about how to create the edit2do.html file. So again, inside our templates, let's create a new HTML file called edit-todo.html. Now from here, we can actually just open up our add-todo.html file. We now need to copy everything inside. You can highlight everything by doing Control A and then copying by Control C. Come back over to edit and paste everything from add to do into edit-todo.html. From here, there are some things we need to change. In the card header, it says make a new to do. Let's change this to let's edit your to do. And now, here we're still going to have the users required to fill in title, description, and priority. Now the only difference is these fields will automatically be populated based on the to-do that the user wants to edit. However, for the static environment or the static HTML file, we do not need to do that and it's not required at this time. Instead of this saying add new to-do, we want this to say edit your to-do. And right under this, we want to create a new button with a type equals button. Class is button danger. And it's going to say delete inside. And this is how users are going to be able to delete to-dos. All right, let's go back to our project and open up our todos.py file and change this to edit-todo. Make sure your environment is running, and let's go back to our browser and refresh the page. Immediately we can see it says let's edit your to-do with an edit your to-do button and a delete button. And also, if we reformat the size, we can see that it's completely responsive for mobile devices. This wraps up creating our edit to do HTML page, and I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to create our static login.html file. Inside templates, let's create a new HTML file called login.html. Inside here, let's open our HTML file. And again, everything above the container, let's copy and paste into a login. And everything under container, let's also copy and paste in login. And in between, we're going to want to say div equals class container. Let's start by saying div class is equal to card. With a div class card header inside saying login. Outside of the card header, but inside the card, let's create a new div of class card body. And now inside the div of class card body, let's create a form. I'm going to delete all the actions inside the form for now. Let's create a new div of form group. Label, which is going to be username as the value. And input, which has type equal to text. Class equals form control. Name equals email and is required. And now you may see a discrepancy between the username and name equals email, and I will cover that in a later video. And now let's create another div of form group. With a label which is password. Which has an input type equals password. Class is equal to form control. Name is equal to password and is required. And now under the div of form group, but before the form, we're going to have to create a button of type submit. With class button primary, which is going to have the login words on the button. And underneath our form and underneath the div of card body, we're going to create another div that's going to be our card footer. So div class card footer text muted, and then we're going to create an anchor tag inside, which the href as a $, and the verbiage is going to be register ? All right, let's save the file, go back to our projects todos.py file, and switch edit to do to login. Save, make sure our server is running, and let's go back to our application and refresh. Here we can see our login page. We're going to have our username, our password, login, and then we'll have this register button at the bottom to be able to go to our register page where users are going to be able to sign up. If we right click and inspect, we can see that it also works with responsive. This wraps up the login HTML file, and I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to create our register.html page. Now the first thing we need to do is right click on templates and create a new HTML file called register.html. And inside here, I'm going to actually just copy and paste all the code from login into register. A lot of the code is going to be the exact same as we're just going to be creating a bigger form. Now the first thing we want to do is inside our register.html file, our card header says login. Let's change this to register. And now one thing we want to do here is everything inside this form, let's delete for right now. This is where it gets slightly different from the login page. So we already have everything at the top, which is the nav bar and some of the header information. We have the scripts, and we already have our div with our container, our card header, and now we're just dealing with the form inside the card body. At the bottom, we also see card footer, which brings us to register. Let's just change that and make it say, already have an account. And now inside here, we're going to use a form row, which allows us to put two different types of information on a single horizontal plane. So let's say div class equals form row. And inside here, we're going to say div class form group and then call medium 6. And inside here, let's create a label, which is going to be email. And then an input type of email with class form control and name email. Let's also now make another div right under the email, which is going to be username, and we're going to follow a lot of the same stuff. So div class equals form group, column medium 6, label of username, with an input of type text, class form control, and name username. And then under this form row, let's copy and paste this form row and place it right underneath the original form row. Here, we're going to change the label to first name, type from email to text, class will remain form control, but the name instead of email will be first name. Now the same thing with here, but we'll change everything to last name. All right, and now under this form row, we're going to create another div, which is going to be a form group. With a label of password, with an input type password, class form control, name password, and is required. And we actually want to go ahead and make all these other inputs required as well. And now let's copy and paste this form group of password and paste it right underneath password. But this time we're going to call this verify password with type password, class form control, but this time it's going to be password2 and also required. Then right before the form, let's create a button of type submit with class button primary, and sign in. All right, let's save the file. Go back to our todos.py file and change login to register. Make sure our application server is running. And now let's go back to our web application and refresh the page. And it looks like we have all of the right fields of email, username, first name, last name, password, and verify password, but these look kind of messed up. So if we go back to our code, we can see that this is using form group while this username is using form control. So inside our form row, where we have our email, which is form group, we want to change our username to also use form group instead of form control. The same thing's happening with last name. So first name is using form group, last name is using form control. Let's change this to form group. Save the file, and let's go back to our browser and refresh the page, and we can see that everything was fixed. We have our register card with our email, username, first name, last name, password, verify password, a sign-in button, and an already have an account button that'll redirect us back to the login page. And this wraps up creating all of the static HTML from scratch, so we can now start enhancing all of our HTML pages with dynamic data from our FastAPI applications. And with that, I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to do the quick guide of just copying and pasting all 5 of the HTML templates over into our template directory, and then just making sure all the HTML files work. Let's now open up what we downloaded for this course, which is the to-do starting files, which we have our static file and our templates folder. Let's open up our templates folder where we're going to see register, login, home, edit to do, and add to do. Let's grab and copy all 5 of those. Let's jump into our application directory and let's just paste them into our templates. And it's going to say we have a discrepancy between our home.htmls. Let's just say overwrite. And again, if you did not follow along with the typing in the full guide of these HTMLs, you won't have any of these until you paste them over. So let's go back to our to-dos and make sure we have our home.html set up. Let's type in our server. And let's go through each one of these to make sure they're all working properly. So I'm going to open up my server, and we can see that we have our home.html rendered. It's going to have a table view with a few buttons with a list of our to-dos. Let's now check out the add to-do. Open our browser back up and refresh the page where our add to-do is going to be making a new to-do. And again, these buttons don't work. This is all just for static, non-dynamic data. Hop on over to our edit to-do. Let's edit your to-do. There's a delete button on how individuals and clients will delete to-dos, and then edit your to-do once you add in new information. Take a peek at our login.html. We refresh this, we'll see our login page with the username, password, login, and register. Again, these buttons do not work, but this is where an individual will be able to log into the application. And lastly, let's check out register. And here we have our register file. So we have our register card with an email, a username, first name, last name, password, verify password. Again, the buttons don't do anything as of right now. We're going to be implementing this shortly. This is a quick guide on how to get all 5 HTML files rendered on your application. And I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to create new APIs that are going to render each one of our HTML templates. So the first thing we need to do is jump into our todos.py file. And inside our todos.py file, we're going to be deleting a lot of things. So starting under our getDB, let's delete our to-do base model and all of the APIs that we've currently wrote. And again, if you ever want to get these APIs again, you can download them directly from this course. And now the first thing we want to do is create a new router.get that has an empty API path. And here, after this, we're going to say, comma, response underscore class equals HTML response. And now under here, we're going to create a new function called async def read all by user. And as the parameter, we're just going to say request of type request. And inside, let's just return templates.templateResponse of home.html with request as the context. Let's save this application and make sure our server's running by typing in uvicorn main:\app reload. And when we open up our browser, we set up a router that all todos.py file APIs are going to be followed first with a prefix of todos. So todos/ is going to now render our todos page. Right under here, let's create a new API, which is going to be for adding a new to-do, but this is just going to be rendering the page. So it's going to be a route.get, and it's going to be add to-do. With a response class of HTML response. And now the function is going to be async def add new to do. And we're just going to pass in again request, and then return templates.templateResponse of add to do.html with request as the context. If we save this and open up our browser, and we say add to do, we're now going to be able to get our add to do page. And if we just go to to-dos, it's going to render our home.html page. Now let's do the same thing for our edit to do by saying router.get edit to do. And now we're going to need to pass in a path parameter, and then response class equals HTML response, async def edit to do, request return templates.template response edit to do.html with request as the context. Let's save this and open up our browser. And this time, let's say edit-to-do/1. And here we can see that we get to a let's edit your to-do page. And these numbers right now don't mean anything because we're not actually using this path parameter to query any data as of right now, but we're definitely going to do this in the future. All right, now let's jump over and do our auth.py file. Now we're definitely going to be removing some of this code, but for the time being, let's just right under this post token, create 2 more APIs. These are going to render our HTML for login and register. But to start, let's go back up to our to-dos and let's grab these 2 imports, the templating for Jinja and our HTML responses. Because we're going to have to add these to our auth.py file. And then this templates.jinja2 templates with our directory of templates, this is also going to need to be added to our auth.py file. After adding those, let's scroll back down to right under our login for access token. Let's create 2 more APIs. The first one being @router.get, and inside here, we're going to say empty API because we have our router calling auth. We're going to return a response class of HTML response, and we're going to create a new function, async def auth page, request as the parameters, and we need to import request as well from FastAPI. And then return templates.template response of login.html with request as the context. And I'm actually going to rename auth page to authentication page. Let's go back to our browser, and instead of to-dos, let's type in auth. And now we can see we get our login page. And now let's add one more API that will redirect us to our registration page. For this one, we're going to say @router.get register response class of HTML response, async def register of request, and then return templates.template response register.html with request as our context. All right, let's now go back to our browser. And now let's type in /register. And there we now have our register page. So we have our register page, our login page, our to-dos page, our edit to-do, and our add to-do. This wraps up creating API requests and router requests to redirect our response to HTML files. And I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to create a layout.html. And the layout.html is going to be more or less the wrapper over each HTML page that we have, so we don't have duplications of code. And we can handle all of this within Jinja. So if we open up our home.html file, we can see that our home.html file is going to have our doc type of HTML with our HTML language of English, a header, and then right under the header we have the start of the body with our navigation bar. At the very bottom of our home.html file, we have all of our scripts. And this is the exact same thing with all of our pages. They all include the links and CSS at the top with the nav bar and the scripts at the bottom. Now, with this approach, we are adding possibilities of bugs within our code base. We could have different nav bars based on different pages. If there's a bug in one of our nav bars, we have to change it in all of our files. And it's significantly easier to have a parent layout file that's in charge of the nav bar and our scripts and our CSS that each HTML file can just inherit. So let's start by creating a layout.html file. We can do this by right-clicking on templates and saying new HTML file. And now within layout.html file, there's some code that we can just copy and paste over. If we jump into our login.html file, we can copy over everything from the doc type all the way down to the container. And make sure you do not include the container, as that's going to be our individual code for each HTML file. Let's now cut that code and paste it in our layout.html file. Let's now go back to our login.html code. And I'm going to move our container to the top. And at the very end of our container, we have the end of the HTML, the end of the body, and our scripts. Let's grab this code as well and paste it at the bottom of our layout.html file. Now within our layout.html file, we have all the code that's going to be duplicated in each HTML file. Now the only difference is inside here, so under the nav bar and before the scripts, we're going to have different code for each HTML file. Now the different code is going to be called block content, and we can classify this within Jinja by doing bracket bracket 2% signs, block content, and then under the block content we can do bracket bracket 2% signs and end block. And now all we have to do is inside login.html, at the very top, so if we open this back up, we can see all the code for our login. Let's drop this down 2 spots, and at the very top, let's do bracket bracket 2% signs, include layout.html with single quotation marks. And then save the file. Let's now jump back over to our application and let's change our to-dos to auth. And immediately we can see that our nav bar and all of our scripts are automatically added into our login.html file. If we look at the code by right-clicking and inspecting, we can see our HTML, our header, our body, which is going to include our navbar, and our scripts at the bottom, all from our layout.html file. And again, this is just to create and export our code into more manageable pieces of code. So now let's go back and do this for every single one of our files. I'm going to just highlight this of include layout.html. I'm going to copy it. And now I'm going to jump into our home.html file. I'm going to scroll up until we can see our div class container. I'm going to close this code and remove everything under the container and everything before the container. And I'm then just going to paste our bracket 2% signs to include our layout.html file. And now let's open up our templates and open up our add-to-do.html. Do the exact same thing. Then our edit-to-do.html. And our register.html. All right, let's save the files and go back to our web application. Refresh the page, and now let's try and go to to-dos. Let's now go to edit to-do. Let's now go to add to-do. And lastly, let's go to our register page. And there we have it, our navbar, our scripts, and our CSS is added to every single one of our pages. This wraps up breaking down our HTML into more manageable pieces of code by creating our layout.html file, and I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in the last lecture, we abstracted the layout.html file to be able to keep consistency among all of our HTML files. Now, typically with the layout.html file, it's going to be mostly handling all the scripts, the CSS, to make sure all of the parent HTML attributes are the same. But I think we can do a little bit more abstraction. So in this lecture, we're going to create the navbar.html file. So let's start by right-clicking on our templates page and creating a new HTML file called navbar.html. And now inside our navbar.html file, let's remove all of the boilerplate code. Let's jump back into our layout.html file. Let's grab everything that defines our navbar. Cut it out. And let's place it in our navbar.html file. So let's go over what's going on. We have our navbar.html file, which has our navbar component, and our layout.html file is going to have all of our predefined code. However, we're doing this just to abstract the navbar code out of our layout.html code. However, we still want every time layout.html is called to pass in our navbar.html. So just like we did in our login.html, to include our layout code, we're going to do the same thing with layout to include our navbar. We can accomplish this by saying bracket 2% signs include 2 single quotation marks navbar.html file. And now let's save our application. If we open up our application and we say refresh, we can see that nothing changes, and that's exactly what we want to happen. We don't want anything to change. That just means that our nav bar is now getting rendered properly within our layout.html. So when one of our files like home.html calls layout.html, it calls it to render before this file is called. Inside our layout.html, we have all of our predefined HTML code of our CSS, our body tag, our body ending tag, our scripts, and inside we're saying, hey, inside our block content and our end content, we can add in our HTML files. And then we're saying we also just want to include our navbar.html file every time layout is called. This just helps with abstraction of our HTML files. This wraps up this lecture on creating a navbar.html file, and I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to update our todos.py file to get all of the to-dos by a single user. And then we're going to update our home.html file to now display the to-dos based on that specific user. And we're going to be hard coding the user ID before querying the database. However, authentication and authorization will be added later into the web application. So let's start by opening up our todos.py file. And immediately we're going to see some imports that might be dull, that say they're not getting used. Ignore those for right now. And of course, the from database import engine session logo with the red lines. That's not really a bug because the sys.path.append is fixing that. So just ignore all of the imports for now. Let's scroll down until we can see our read all by user. As of right now, our read all by user is just redirecting back to our home.html file with a context of just request that doesn't really do much right now. The first thing we need to add is before the return templates.template response, we need to query the database. So to do this, as a parameter, we need to pass in our dependency of our DB. We can do this by saying db : session equals depends get db. And now within the function, let's now create a new variable called to-dos, which is going to be querying the database and getting all of the to-dos based on a specific user. And for this example, we're going to be using user1, which is my Coding with Roby profile. So let's start by saying to-dos equals db.query models.todos .filter models.todos.owner ID is equal to 1 .all, which is going to retrieve all to-dos based on the user ID of 1. And then we're going to return our templates.template response to our home.html, but we're going to add in one more context of to-dos : to-dos after request. So now we're just going to be able to pass in a Jinja variable of to-dos that's going to hold all of the data of to-dos variable from our Python script. Let's now jump back into our home.html file, and inside our home.html file, we're going to enhance our table to now display all of the to-dos based on that specific user. So to start, let's remove all of our to-dos except for one. And now right before our tr, or our table row of class pointer, but within our table body, let's do bracket 2% signs for to-do in to-dos, And then after our TR, let's create our end for. And now remember, we're going to be using one bracket with a % because this is a conditional or an operator. And to use the actual variable of to do now, we need to use a double bracket. I'm going to start by removing this ID. And inside the TD, I'm going to remove take out the trash and do bracket bracket to do dot title. So for each to do in to dos, we're going to recreate this TR table row. And based on how many to dos are connected with the user ID of 1 is exactly how many to dos we're going to create. And each time this is getting created, we're going to print the title of that specific to do. And now something that we also want to do is enhance this delete button. We don't actually want to delete on this page. So let's change this to edit. And then our class is going to be button info. And at the beginning of button, we're going to say on click. And on click means redirect or call the API that we created. And here we're going to say on click equals double quotation marks window.location.href equals single quotation marks of edit to do / to do ID within double brackets. Let's save the application and open up our /todos to see what it looks like. We can see that our application is running correctly. And again, our complete buttons don't do anything. However, our edit buttons are going to redirect to our let's edit your to-do with the correct ID displaying for that specific to-do. Now we don't have any of this getting populated right now, but being able to pass in the ID from the to-do is the first step. And now one more thing I'm seeing is this over here, our numbers are always 1. And that's because we have it hard-coded to 1 within our first table data. Now to be able to fix this, we have to call the loops index and not just pass in a number or the ID. To do this, let's type in bracket bracket loop.index. If we save the application now and go back and we refresh, we're going to now see that that's going to increment to the next to do, so we have a proper numbering structure. This wraps up being able to call all of your to-dos based on a specific user ID and then populate it on your home.html page using scripts and templating for our Jinja application. This wraps up everything for this lecture, and I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to create an add-to-do function within our todos.py file and to allow our add-to-do.html file to submit a new to-do so we can add it to the database. Let's start by opening up our todos.py file, and let's scroll down until we can see our add-to-do API with our add new to-do. So this function, add new to do, brings us to our add to do page. So we're going to have to create a new function right under this add new to do that handles the posts of add to do to submit new to dos. So right under add new to do, let's create a new router of @router.post. And we're going to name it the exact same thing as the .get of add to do. And we're going to make the response class HTML response. We're then going to create a new function of async def create to do. And inside here, we're going to pass in request of type request. And I'm going to scroll back to the top to import form from FastAPI. And now I'm going to scroll back down and create title of type string equals form, parenthesis, and 3 dots. And then I'm going to say description of type string equals form. Priority of type int equals form. And then we're going to create our DB session of DB of type session equals depends get DB. And now here, let's create a new to-do model, which equals models.todos. To-do model.title is going to equal our title that we're passing in. To-do model.description is going to equal our description from our parameters. To-do model.priority is going to come from our parameters. And then our to-do model.complete, we're just going to start as false and define it as the false in the code because they want to be creating a to-do that's true and already complete. So let's just say it's false. And then to-do model.ownerID, we're just going to say is 1 for right now until we implement authentication. And now let's say db.add our to-do model, and then db.commit, which will save our model. And then here we're going to use return redirect response. And redirect response will redirect us back to a specific API, which will call the function instead of redirecting us to a specific page. And we're going to have to import redirect response. So at the very top of our page, let's say from SQLAlchemy.responses, import redirect response. And while we're here, we have to do another import from SQLETTE, import status. And now let's scroll back down to our API. So return redirect response, URL of /todos, status code equals status.http 302 found. And this status code is needed to make sure our API is calling a GET request. So our to-dos is going to be calling a GET to-dos, which again is just going to render our home page. But this time it should have a new to-do because we're saving a new to-do to the database. All right, so when this router.post is called, we're calling the add to-do, which is different than this add to-do because they're different HTTP request methods. We're going to be returning a response class of HTML response. This function is called create to-do, where we're going to be passing in a title, description, and priority. And then we're going to be creating a new to-do model with that information and then saving it to the database and then going and calling our get to-dos API path. Let's jump back into our project and open up our add-todo.html. And now one of the only things we have to add, because we already have a form created, is we need to say method equals post. This will now submit and call a post method of whatever the URL we currently are under. So within our to-dos, when we say add to do, we're going to add to-do.html, which is going to be add to do. Now the form, now that the method is going to be post, it's going to be doing this exact same add to do because we're already on that URL, but just making it a post, which is going to call the exact same API route, but of a different HTTP request method. Let's make sure our server is running, and let's open up our application and refresh. Let's now go to our Add To Do page. And let's fill this out. So we're going to say the title is Get New Phone, description, my phone is broken, with a priority of 5. And there we have it. The application redirects us back to our to-dos page, and now we have Get New Phone as a new to-do under the user 1. Now one bug we can see is our Add a New To-Do doesn't redirect us to that page. Let's open up our home.html page, scroll to the bottom until you can see Add a New To-Do. We can see the href is just pointing to an empty URL. Let's change this to add-to-do. Save the application and reopen up our browser, refresh, and now when you click Add a New To-Do, it redirects you to the new to-do, and if you fill this out, it redirects you back to the to-dos page with a new to-do. This wraps up the lecture on creating a new to-do within our web application, and I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to set up our edit to-do to auto-populate all of the data based on the to-do ID that's getting passed in. Let's jump on over to our code, and in our todos.py file, let's scroll down until we can see our edit to-do function that brings us to our edit-todo.html page. From here, one of the first things we need to do is pass in the path parameter of to-do ID as a parameter. And we also want to pass in the DB session of getDB. Now we want to call and create a to-do variable which is equal to db.query models.todos.filter models.todos.id equals to-do ID, and just return the first record we find. We then want to pass and enhance our context to now include our to-do of type to-do. Alright, and now let's open up our edit-to-do.html page. Now from here, we want to do some housekeeping to make sure our to-do is working. So to start, let's check our title and let's make the value of our input equal to to-do.title wrapped in double brackets. I'm going to save the application and go back to our browser and refresh the page. And here we can see that the title now says cut the grass. We go and fetch the to-do based on this to-do ID. We then pass that to-do to our Jinja template and then pass the title of to-do.title into our title box. We now need to do the exact same thing for description and priority. But now for our description, because it's a text area, we have to do it slightly different than we're currently doing for our title. Our title, we're using value. Within our text area, we're just going to pass it right in the middle of the text area tags. And now for priority, we have to do an if statement for each option to check if the to-do.priority is equal to that number so we can select and start that option. So inside this option tag, let's say bracket bracket 2% signs, if to-do.priority is equal to 1, we want to say selected equals selected. And that means what option is going to be default for that to do. And then we want to do bracket bracket 2% signs end if after. And we're going to want to copy this for every single option, but just change the condition within the if else to each number of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's now save the application and go back to our browser and refresh the page. We can now see that our title, description, and priority is all filled in. Now our description is spaced off, and that's because of the way we've added it to our DOM. So we can come back over here and remove those spaces in the very beginning. And then resave our application. Now this wraps up setting up our edit to do to now show all the information about that to do. So now we know exactly how we're modifying each to do. This wraps up the lecture, and I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to be adding a post edit to do / to do ID to be able to submit new to-dos that have been edited. So the first thing we need to do is jump into our todos.py file and to create a new API of @router.post, and inside of the post we need to say /edit to do / to do ID, and then return a response class of HTML response. We then want to create a new function called async def edit to do commit, and as the parameters we can say request of type request, to do ID of type int, which is going to be the path parameter, title of type string, which is equal to form, description of type string, which is equal to form, priority of type int, which is equal to form, and then a new DB session, which equals depends get DB. We then want to say to do underscore model, which is going to create us a new variable, equals db.query models.todos, .filter models.todos.id, which equals our to do ID of our path parameter, and then to return the first record. Now that we have the old to do model, we want to modify this with the new form variables. So to do model dot title equals title, to do model dot description equals description, and to do model dot priority equals priority. We then want to say db.add to do model db.commit. And then finally, we want to say return redirect response of the URL of /todos with a status code equal to status.http 302 found. And now let's jump back into our edit-to-do.html, and inside here, let's change our form to method equals post. Let's go back to our browser and refresh the page. And I'm going to say cut the grass. And I'm going to add an exclamation mark at the end. And then I'm going to say edit your to-do. And there we can see the cut the grass now has an exclamation mark. If we go back to edit and we say cut the grass because it is long, and we click edit your to-do, we get cut the grass because it is long. And if we want to change any of this information to it is getting long with our capital I, and changing our priority to a 3, and we edit your to-do, and we go back to edit, we can see that all the information saves because we're saving it to the database. This wraps up how to edit your to-do within a full stack application, and I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to create our delete functionality to be able to delete a to-do. So the first thing we want to do is go into our todos.py file. At the very bottom, we're going to create our new delete to-do functionality. Now, one thing that's different between full stack applications and APIs are we're going to be using our router.get delete by to-do ID for the full stack application, while if this was just simply an API, we'd be using the .delete HTTP request method. But since this is a full stack application, let's do @router.get/delete/to-do ID. And then underneath, let's create the function of async def delete to do. And as the parameters, we're going to say request of type request, to do ID of int, which is going to be the path parameter, and db of type session, which equals our dependency of getDB. We then want to say to-do model equals db.query models.todos, .filter models.todos.id equals to-do ID, and .filter models.todos.owner ID is equal to 1, and then return the first record. And this is just verifying that the ID belongs to the user and is valid. If there is no item of to-do model, then we want to say return redirect response of URL is equal to to-dos, comma status code equals status.http 302 found. If to-do model is not none, we can then say db.query models.todos.filter models.todos ID equals to-do ID, and then say db.commit, and then finally return our redirect response to our URL of to-dos with the status code of status.http 302 found. Let's now jump back into our edit-todo.html page. And let's scroll down until we can see our delete button. And here we need to create an on-click listener. So let's say on-click equals double quotation marks window.location.href equals single quotes /to-do/delete / our to-do ID of double brackets, and then we'll close off the single quote in double quotation marks. Let's save the application and then jump back to our browser, refresh our page, and I'm going to start back on our to-dos page. And from here, I'm going to say cut the grass because it is getting long. Let's edit it. And now let's delete. And I must have forgot to add the .delete functionality. So right at the end of our db.query models.todos.filter by models.todos.id, right here we need to say .delete. Now let's go back to our browser and try again by refreshing the application and clicking Edit. And now let's click Delete. And there we have it. We are now deleting our to-dos based on the ID and validating that the owner ID is equal to 1 at this time before we implement authorization and authentication. This wraps up the lecture on how to delete a to-do, and I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to be going over how we can implement the complete functionality for our to-dos. The first thing we need to do is go under our todos.py file and create a new router of .get, which is going to say /complete /to-do ID and then a response class of HTML response. We then need to create a new function of async def complete to do with parameters of request, a path parameter of to-do ID of type int, and a DB of type session, which is equal to our dependency of getDB. Let's now query and create a new variable of to-do, which is going to be to-do equals db.query models.todos.filter models.todos.id equals to our path parameter of to-do ID. Let's then say to-do.complete equals not to-do.complete. And really what I'm saying here, complete is a Boolean and we're setting it to false. When this function is called, we switch the false to true, and if it's already true, we'll switch it to false. So we're switching it to the opposite of what it already is. Let's now say db.addToDo, db.commit, and then return redirect response of URL equals /todos, and status code equals status.http 302 found. And for our db.query, I'm also going to add first. Alright, and now let's jump back over to our home.html page. Where we need our complete to now use our on-click of window.location.href equals complete slash bracket bracket todo.id. And now one thing about this is no matter what, we won't know if it's complete or not because we're always going to be showing the complete button. So what we need to do is grab everything in this TR or table row, copy, and let's just space down 2 more spots and repaste it. And I'm going to do a format, and on PyCharm you can do Control-Alt-Shift-L and say reformat the selected file. And after that's reformatted, I'm going to go back through this new pointer class, and I'm going to change this from complete to undo. And I'm going to change this TD of todo.title and add a new class of strikethrough-TD. And strikethrough-TD belongs in our CSS base.css code. And now what we want to do is at the top of this first pointer that says complete, let's say bracket bracket 2% if todo.complete is equal to false, render this. And right before the next TR, let's say else. And then at the very bottom before int4, we have to end our if-else statement by doing bracket bracket 2% end if. Let's save our file and reopen up our browser. Let's refresh the page. And now when we click complete, it should get a completely line through it with a new button of undo. And we also want the background to go completely green when completed. So let's just close our browser, and right after the else where it says classes pointer, let's type in alert space alert success. Resave the file and go back to our browser, refresh the page, and now when we click complete, the background goes green and we get a dash through get new phone. This wraps up the complete functionality of our to-dos, and I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to implement our login feature to our to-do application using FastAPI. So the first thing we need to do is open up our auth.py file. And at the very top and right under router equals API route, we're going to create a new class of login form. Right under login form, we're going to say def underscore underscore init underscore underscore. And as the parameters, we're going to say self comma request of type request. And then we're going to say self.request of type request is equal to request. Self.username of type optional string equals none. And self.password of optional string is equal to none. We then want to create another function called async def create OAuth form of type self. And inside here we want to say form equals await self.request.form, self.username equals form.getEmail, and self.password equals form.getPassword. And what this is going to do is when we submit an HTML form, we're able to get a username and password. However, when we're doing a OAuth form, we need an email and password. So what we're doing for this create OAuth form is saying for the username and password that we created the login form with, turn the username and say .get email and .get password so that when we call the username, we're actually getting the email from the form submitted. It's also good to note that the email is actually just a text field. Just OAuth needs the name email for it to properly work. So when we get the text field of email, we're just changing it into username so then we can run our application using a username and password instead of an arbitrary email variable. Let's now scroll back down until we get to our authentication page function. And right under authentication page, let's create a new API request of @router.post of an empty string, comma, response class equals HTML response. Let's create a new function called async def login. And as the parameters, we're going to say request of type request, and then DB of type session equals the dependency of getDB. And then we're going to say try form equals login form request. Await form.create OAuth form, and response equals redirect response of type URL of /todos and status code equals status.http 302 found. But we also have to import redirect response and status at the top. And now we need to import redirect response. So from starlette dot responses, import redirect response. And now right above where we see login for access token, we need to create a new parameter of response of type response. We need to import response from FastAPI. And inside here, when we authenticate our user, if not user, we're raising a token exception. Let's return this to false. Token expires equal time delta. I'm going to change it from 20 minutes to 60. Our token is correct, and here instead of returning a token, I'm going to set a cookie. So I'm going to say response.setCookie where key is equal to access token, the value is equal to the token, and HTTP only is equal to true. And then instead of returning the dictionary of a token, I'm going to return the Boolean of true. And then I'm going to go back down to login, and under response, I'm going to say validate user cookie equals await login for access token. And then as the parameters, response equals response, form data equals form, and DB equals DB. And now I'm going to say, if not validate user cookie, I'm going to add a message which is equal to incorrect username or password. And then I'm going to say return templates.templateResponse to login.html with the context of request and message. Return response. And then accept HTTP exception message, which is equal to unknown error. And then I'm going to say return templates.templateResponse to login.html with the context of request and message. Oh, and it looks like I have a capital S. We want that to be a lowercase s. So what we're doing is when a user tries to submit a login, we validate the user cookie in the login access token, where inside here, we're just passing in the response, setting a cookie if the user is valid with the token, and then returning true or false. If the message is not true, we refresh the login page and pass in a message saying incomplete username or password. If validate user cookie is true, we return the response with the cookie set. If something breaks along the way, we use an except to catch the try except message of unknown error and return back to the login page with a message of unknown error. Let's now jump over to our login.html file. Inside here, the first thing we want to do is go to our form and type in method equals post and action equals /auth. Let's make sure your server is running, resave the file, and let's open up our browser. Let's swap over to our auth page. And here, if we right-click and inspect, and we hop over to our application, and we jump down to our cookies for our application, we can see that there is nothing set. However, if we type in coding with Roby with the password test1234 ! We can see that our JWT token is now saved as a cookie within our app. Now we're still having this all hard-coded with the user of 1, but we're going to have to go back and edit all of our to-do APIs to now validate this token. If the token does not exist, we should return the user back to the login page. Now let's go back to the auth again. If we delete this token, and if we type in a user that does not exist, we're getting an internal server error. So let's go back to our application to send the user back to the login page. Up here where we validate the user, we can see that we're raising false. Let's change this to return false. And now when we return false, we're validating if the user cookie is valid or not, adding a message and then returning the user back to login. Let's open up our browser. refresh the page, and now if we type in a username and password that does not exist, it refreshes back to the login. But it would be helpful if users knew if there was a reason they were not logged in, whether it's an unknown server error or a failure with the username and password. If we go back to the code and open up our login.html, we can add messages directly to the body. So right under card body, but before the form, let's add a few spaces just so we have room for coding. We're going to say bracket, bracket, 2% signs, if message. So we're checking if message exists. And here we're going to code a little bit into the future, but we're going to say bracket, bracket, 2% signs, if message equals a logout successful, or message equals user successfully created, we're going to print a new div of class alert, alert success, with a role of alert and print the message. And we're going to say bracket, bracket, 2% signs else underneath of div class alert, alert danger with the role alert with a message. And then we're just going to close off both end ifs. Now let's save the application and go back to our browser. Let's refresh the page. If we type in a fake username again and a fake password, we now get incorrect username or password flashed at the top. However, if we type in a username that exists, we successfully log in by getting a valid JWT token saved as a cookie. This wraps up the login functionality within our to-do full stack application, and I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to update our getCurrentUser to now get the token from our cookie session. And we're going to update our to-dos to now retrieve the token and get the JWT payload to verify users before calling and getting to-dos. So let's dive in. The first thing we need to do is open up our auth.py file and head over to our getCurrentUser. And the first thing we need to do is just remove this token string inside as a dependency. Inside here, we're just going to pass in a request of type request. And under the try, we're going to create our own variable of token, which is equal to request.cookies.getAccessToken. And if we remember, the cookie that we save in our applications on our browser is called access token, which holds our JWT. So if our token is none, therefore that token does not exist, we want to return none. And we also want to verify that the token has not expired. So if username is none or user ID is none, let's also right here return none. All right, now let's go to our todos.py file. And let's go to our read all by user. And everything looks good here, except for now we just want to verify our user has a JWT that's active as a cookie. So let's create a new variable user, which is equal to await getCurrentUser, and we're going to pass in the request. And here we're going to validate if user is none or not. If user is none, we want to redirect our response back to authentication with the status code of status 302 found, just so the user can sign back in. And if the user is valid, instead of hard coding models.todos.ownerID to 1, we're going to want to say user.getID. All right, now let's save the application and reopen our browser. Let's try and go to our to-dos file real quick. And we can see it automatically redirects us right back to our login page. And that's because if we right-click and inspect and we go to our application, we can see that there's no cookie. And since there's no cookie, we're automatically redirecting back because users equal to none. If we type in a fake username, again, we just get an incorrect username or password and no cookie. And if we type in a real username and password, we redirect to to-dos, we validate our user with our cookie, and then once we validate the user with our cookie, and then we get our user back and we validate the user's ID when we fetch all the to-dos. We're also going to want to add this for all of the other to-dos that we're using in here so far. So I'm just going to copy this. And we really want to add this just about every single page. So our add new to-do, we need to make sure a user's logged in before we can add a new to-do. When we post the add to-do, we definitely want to add it in here. And we also want to verify that in our to-do model.ownerID, that instead of hard coding the owner ID to 1, that we get whatever user's currently signed in. In our edit to do, we also want to verify. In our edit to do commit, we want to verify. Within our delete to do, we would like to verify. And again, right here where we're passing in hard code of 1, let's pass in the user. So user.getID. And then also on our complete to do, we're going to want to pass this in. All right, now this is looking really good. And all these other extra imports we can just remove for right now. And again, these 2 red lines, ignore those for this tutorial. Let's save our application and let's just verify that once we delete our cookie, we get redirected. So let's start by deleting our cookie. And now in our URL, let's go to todos/add to do, and we get redirected. Let's now try and go to edit to do with an arbitrary ID, and we also get redirected. All right, and everything's looking really, really good. This wraps up our login and adding cookies and verifying the cookies on APIs. And I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to implement the logout functionality. Now to implement the logout functionality, the first thing we need to do is open up auth.py. And let's scroll down until we see our register and our login. I'm going to make the logout functionality right between both. And now the logout functionality is going to be another GET request of type logout. So at router.get, and as the path, we're going to say /logout. We're then going to create a new Python function, async def logout of type request of our parameter. Message is going to be equal to logout successful. Response is equal to templates.templateResponse login.html as a parameter. And then as the context, we're going to say request and message of message. We're then going to say response.delete cookie key equals access token. And this is what's going to delete the cookie. So when we sign in and log in, we save an access token as a cookie, which holds our JWT. And when we log out, we delete the JWT and the token in the cookie. And then just return the response. All right, let's try this out. So if we go back to our browser, we will right click and inspect so we can watch the token. If we sign in successfully, we get the token. And if we say /auth/logout, we get a logout successful and our token is removed. Now, however, when we're signed in, there is no logout button. So let's add that to our HTML. Let's go over to our navbar.html. And under this UL, we're going to say display this home button only if the user is logged in. So if user exists, we'll show it. If not, we won't. And then let's create another UL or unordered list with a class of navbar-nav mlauto. With a new Jinja script of bracket 2% if user. And inside we need to create a new list of class navItem m1. With an anchor tag inside of type equals button, class button outline light, with an href which goes to auth/logout, and the words are going to say logout, and then we need to end the if. Let's save our file and open up our browser. When we refresh the application, I'm going to close this. I'm going to sign in. And we still see nothing. And that's because we're checking if user exists, display this, and if user exists, display this. However, in this, it's saying that the user is not displaying. And that's because we need to add it to our todo.py file. So let's open up our project and go over to todos.py. For each of these requests that we're checking for a user, let's also just pass the user in our context. And now you can just sit back and watch me pass the user into the context in most of our responses from our todos.py APIs. All right, I think that's all the locations. We don't have to do it at the redirect response because the redirect response is going to be calling this API, which if we scroll up to /todos, it's just going to be inside this API. So now if we save the file and go back to our browser and refresh our page, we can now see that there's a home and a logout button. If we inspect, the logout button is also in the mobile responsive web design. If we click logout, we get logout successful with no cookie, and the logout and the home button are removed. This wraps up the logout functionality on a full stack application using FastAPI, and I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this video, we're going to go over how to create our register functionality. Now, the first thing we need to do is jump on over to our auth.py file, scroll to the bottom until you see register, and right under register, let's create a new API. We're going to say @router.post/register response class equals HTML response. And this is going to be a fairly big function. Let's say async def register user. As the requirements and parameters, we're going to say request of type request, email of type string equals the form, username of type string equals form, first name of type string equals form, last name of type string equals form, password of type string equals form, password 2 of type string equals form, and DB of type session equals our dependency of getDB. We're also going to have to import form from FastAPI. We then want to create a new variable called validation1, which is equal to dbQuery models.users .filter models.users.username and equal to username.first. So we're checking to see if this username is currently used. And then we're going to create another variable of validation2, which is equal to db.query models.users .filter models.users.email is equal to email.first. And then we want to validate all three validations. The first validation is password is not equal to password 2, or validation 1 is not none, or validation 2 is not none. So we're checking to make sure password 1 and password 2 are the same thing. Validation 1 is none and validation 2 is none. If any of these three conditions fail, we want to create a new variable called message, which is equal to invalid registration request, and return templates.templateResponse that returns back to register.html with the context of request of type request and message of type message. We then want to say user model equals models.users, user model.username equals username, user model.email equals email, user model.firstname is equal to firstname, and user model.lastname is equal to lastname. We then want to say hash password is equal to the function get password hash, and then we're going to pass in the password. User model.hashed password is now equal to hash password. And we want to say the user model is active, so we're going to make this true. We then want to say db.add user model, db.commit, and then let's create a new message equal to user successfully created, and we're going to return the user back to templates.templateResponse of login.html, where the context is going to be request with our message equal to message. All right, and now let's jump over to our register.html page. Where the first thing we can add is this href to go to our auth page. We can scroll up and make our form of type method post and our action of /auth/register. And right under the card body, let's check to see if message exists by doing bracket 2% signs and then if message. And then right under, I'm going to say end if. And then I'm going to say div class alert danger role alert with the message inside a div. All right, let's save the file and see what runs. I'm going to refresh our page. Our register button's not set up yet, so let's go set that up real quick as well. Let's jump over to our login.html page. And here in our href, we're just going to say register. Now let's go back here, refresh, and click register. And for the first account, I'm going to use an account that already exists, like Coding with Roby. We try and sign in. We go right back to the register page with invalid registration request. Now let's try a new user of example user to see what that returns. Example user is already taken. And now let's use one that we know. I'm just going to say phone. And I know this is kind of a goofy email and username, and we're just doing this because we know this user does not exist. And phone, the user was successfully created. Now let's sign in as phone. When we sign in, they have no to-dos, so let's create one to-do. I'm going to make the title new to-do for phone. Description, first to-do ever at the priority of 3. And there we have it, and we can sign back out and log out phone. This wraps up the registration for our full stack FastAPI application, and I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to be doing a little bit of code cleanup. There was some carryover from our APIs over into our full stack web application, mostly in our auth.py file, so let's clean that up. If we open up our auth.py file, we scroll to the top, we can now see that we no longer use this create user. We can also scroll down a little bit more, and we can quickly see that in our get current user, we return none here when the user or user ID is invalid. But this will break it when the time on the token expires. So what we really want to do here now is just log out the request. Which will automatically delete the token instead of trying to validate the token request. And this create user function, we no longer use in this full stack application. And lastly, we don't use any of these exceptions. These exceptions are more used for just RESTful APIs than for full stack applications. And then if we jump over to our todos.py file, really the only thing that we can clean up here is there's a lot of spaces at the end. This wraps up the code cleanup, and I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to do code cleanup part 2 for our full stack application using FastAPI. Now the first thing we need to do is head over to our auth.py file and scroll down until we see get current exception. Now this get current exception is a function that we created, and it no longer exists due to us deleting it in the last video. So we're going to make this just an HTTP exception. So we're going to say HTTP exception, and as the parameters, we're going to say status code equals a 404 and details are not found. Okay. And that covers all the changes we want to make in our auth.py file, so I'm just going to save this. And now in our main.py file, we want to make it so all URLs that are just slash, so not slash to-dos or not slash auth, redirect to our to-dos route. Now, if we remember correctly, our to-dos.router starts with a prefix of slash to-dos, while our auth.router starts with the prefix of slash auth. So if we go into our URL and we just say localhost slash, it actually just returns a error because there's no page on just the normal URL. So I'm going to make sure all just normal URLs redirect to our slash to-dos. To do this, we need to do two imports, which we've done in our last two videos, which is import status and our import redirect response. And now, right under our app.mount static and before our app include routers, we want to create a GET request, which is we're just going to call root. So we're going to say @app.get and just with a slash. And then async def root. And then we're going to return redirect response to our URL of to-dos with a status code equal to status.http 302 found. And then I'm going to save this. And then our last change is going to be in our navbar.html, where currently in our href for our home, we have it redirecting pretty much to nothing. We want to make sure this redirects to slash. And I'm going to save this. So this is going to redirect to our main.py file of slash, which is going to redirect to our to-dos. And once in our to-dos, we already know that we have a slash to-dos call somewhere in here. Right here we have a slash, which is going to be with the prefix of slash to-dos. So this is actually slash to-dos. And if the user is not valid, we redirect again to auth. So there's kind of a double redirection happening. Slash will bring us to slash to-dos. And if a user isn't signed in, slash to-dos is going to redirect us to auth. We can see this in action, but before we do that, let's open up our file directory of our project. So the first thing I'm going to do is close our project. And I'm going to open up our file directory of our project. Now the reason I'm doing this is this to-do app is kind of irrelevant. We do not need this folder. So I'm going to open this up. I'm going to grab everything inside our to-do app folder for our full stack application and drag it just into the parent folder of our project. Then I'm going to jump back into our FastAPI, and I can now see that our to-do app is completely empty. So I'm just going to delete this to-do app. Then I'm going to jump back into PyCharm, and we can see that our to-do app is completely removed. All right, so we did four things actually. We have changed our auth.py file to return a HTTP exception. We changed our navbar to now return back to just slash, and we added main.py, which is going to be a slash that redirects to to-dos. And we removed the to-do.app folder. So we can see that in our FastAPI application, we have our API env, and then we just have all of our files kind of just within that parent directory. Let's see it in action. So we don't need a cd into to-do app anymore because that does not exist. So let's just type in uvicorn main:\app -- reload. We can see our application has started up. So let's open up our browser where we can see it's on auth. If I remove this completely and I just press enter, it's going to redirect to auth because our empty URL is going to redirect to to-dos, which is going to redirect to auth. Let's type in coding with Roby, password test1234, exclamation mark. Once we're here, if we remove this now, we can see it just redirects to to-dos. If we go into edit or eat breakfast and we're like, actually, we don't want to do anything here, and we click home, it's going to redirect us right back to to-dos. So our application is now even better than it was before, with our URL now doing proper redirects, and we now have buttons working in the nav bar. It's just a much, much better final application. Well, this wraps up this lecture of Clean Up Our App Part 2, and I will see you in the next video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to go over the assignment for our full stack application. Well, our assignment is to enhance our application so a user can now change their password. Well, to be able to do this, we need to create a new template, which is some kind of UI UX for the user to be able to change their password. Create a new route that we're going to be calling users.py. And then add the ability to verify the current password before you change the password. And that's a pretty common rule to follow when dealing with password changes on applications, is a user must verify either their username and password or just their password before supplying the new password. And in this case, we're going to say username and password of the original password and then our new password to verify that they are the user so we can properly change the password. Well, to get started, the very first thing we should do is let's go ahead and create a new template. And this new template is going to be in our templates directory. And I'm going to call this template file edit-user-password.html. All right, and I'm just going to make this title say password, and then we're just going to stop this for now until we create the route to get here. All right, and now I saved this file. So now let's go to our routers and create a new route called users.py. And now inside users.py, we need to do a couple imports just to start it all off. So in the beginning, we're just going to type in all the imports so we don't have to worry about imports anymore for this assignment. Now to start, we're going to say import sys, also known as SYS for system. And then sys.path.append, 2 dots. And then we're going to say from Starlight, import status. From Starlight.responses, import redirect response. And then we can say from FastAPI, import depends, API router, request, and form. Import models. And then we can say from database, import engine, session local. And then from SQLAlchemy.orm, import session. From Pydantic, import base model. And then from .auth, import get current user, verify password, and get password hash. And then of course we need our from FastAPI.responses, import our HTML response. And then from FastAPI.templating, import Jinja2 templates. And then right under this, we're going to say router equals API router. And then within the parentheses, we want to say prefix is equal to /users. Tags is going to be a list, just users inside. And then our responses is going to be a 404 with brackets of description not found. And then we just need to do our normal routing due diligence of creating some of the main scripts. So we can say models.base.metadata.create all bind engine. And then templates equals JWT templates, where as the parameter, we're going to say directory equals templates. And then we need to create a DB instance. So we can say def get DB, try DB equals session local. And then yield DB. And finally, db.close. Then we need to create a Pydantic object of class user verification, where we're going to be passing in our base model. With a username that is of type string, a password that is of type string, and a new password that is of type string. And here we're creating the form that the user is going to be submitting, where they need a username, a password, and a new password. And original password is going to be the password. All right, and now let's create our first route, which will actually open up our edit user password.html file. We need our new route to say @router.get/edit password as the path, with our response class equal to HTML response. Then we want to create the function of async def edit user view, and we're going to pass in request of type request. And we want to do our verification for our user. So user equals await get current user, and we're going to pass in the request. If user is none, return redirect response of URL equals /auth with a status code of status.http 302 found. And if the user is not null, we can just return templates.template response, where we're going to pass in edit user password.html. Where through our context, we're going to say request is going to be of type request or equal to request, and user is going to be of type user and or equal to user. All right, now let's save the file and type in uvicorn main:app-reload. Let's open up our browser and refresh the page. We can go to our auth file. Let's type in our username and password. All right, and we actually need to set up our router and do a few other things that I totally forgot about. So let's go to our main.py file. And inside our main.py file, we need to import our users. And then at the bottom where we say app.include router of auth.router and of todos.router, we need to say app.include router of users.router. All right, let's save that. And now let's go to our navbar.html real quick. And inside our navbar.html, let's scroll down till we can see logout. And right above logout, we're going to write one more list script above it. We're going to make a new tag of li with a class that is equal to nav item m-1. And then we're going to say an anchor tag of a tag type equals button. Class equals button, button outline light. With an href that is equal to users/edit password, and we're going to call this edit password or edit user. All right, now let's type in unicorn main :app -- reload. Okay, if we just look at this line, we can say that I forgot an equal sign. I put a minus sign here. So if we go back to my users.py file, which you probably caught, we can just change this to equal. And let's restart the server. Okay, let's open up our application, refresh the page, and now we can see we have a edit user button in the nav bar. When we click that, it's going to bring us to our edit user password, where our title is password. So this is working. We just don't have any code yet in this. So if we go back to our application and close out, we can then go to our edit user password.html. And here we're going to add some more code. We can start by just deleting everything. And the first thing we want to do is add in 2 brackets and 2 % signs and say include layout.html. And then we want to create a div of class container, a div of class card, and then another div of class card header. And inside the class card header, we're going to say, let's edit your password. And then outside the card header, we're going to create another div of class card body. And at the very top of the card body is where I want to type in our messages, where it's going to say, hey, your password is updated successfully, or your password was not updated successfully due to a multiple of different errors. So let's start by saying div class card body. And then inside here, we want to say bracket bracket 2 % signs if message. So if message is true, then we want to say bracket bracket 2 % signs if message is equal to password updated. Then we want to create a new div with a class that is equal to alert success with a role of alert. And inside this div, we want to just print our message by doing 2 brackets message. Then under this div, we want to say bracket bracket 2 % signs of else, where we're going to say another div of class alert danger with the role equal to alert, where we're also just going to pass in the message. And then outside of the div, we want to say end if, both with 2 brackets and 2%. We then want to create a form where we know our method is going to be equal to post, but we're not sure what the action is going to be at this time, so we can just put a £. Div class equals form row. Another div inside this div called class form group, column medium 6 with a label equal to username. And an input underneath of type text with a class of form control, name, username, and this field is required. We then want to say another div of class form group, with the label of verify original password. With an input of type password, class that is equal to form control, name is equal to password and is also required. We then want to say div class equals form group, label new password, and then input of type password, class is equal to form control with the name equal to password2 that is required. And then right before the end of the form tag, we want to add in a button where we can say type is equal to submit. So it's going to submit the form with a class of button primary with the button saying edit. All right, now let's save this and rerun our server. Let's go back to our application, refresh the page, and there we have it. Let's edit your password with username, verify original password, and new password. So this is awesome stuff. Let's go back to our application and go to our users.py file, where now we need to create a new route that is going to take in the username, password, and new password, verify the user is signed in and that the user is typing in their correct username and password, and if not, we need to display the correct message. So to do this, we can start by saying @router.post, and we're going to call this /edit-password. with a response class of HTML response. And then we're going to say async def user password change, where we're going to pass in a few parameters. Our first one's going to be request of type request. Then we want username of type string equals form with 3 dots. Password of type string equals form with 3 dots. And password 2 of type string equals form with 3 dots. And then we want to pass in our DB of type session equals depends get DB. After this, let's type in user equals await get current user, and we're going to pass in the request. Then let's say if user is none, return redirect response of URL is equal to /auth with our status code equal to status.http 302 found. And then we can say user data equals db.query models.users.filter. Models.users.username is equal to username.first. And here we want to create the variable of message, which is going to be equal to invalid username or password. Then we want to say if user data is not none, if username is equal to userdata.username, and verify password, and we pass in password and our user data.hash password returns true. Then user data.hash password is equal to get password hash password 2. We then want to say db.add user data, db.commit, and then we want to override our message with password updated, and then return templates.template response, where we're going to pass in edit user password.html. And as the context, we're going to pass in request of type request, user, which is of type user and equal to user, and message, which is equal to message. All right, and now let's go back up to our edit user password.html, where we can now say in our form, our action is going to be /users/edit password. All right, I'm just going to say save all. Reopen up our terminal, refresh the page. And I'm going to type in coding with Roby, and I'm going to butcher our original password. I'm going to make it incorrect and then pass in a new password just to see what pops up. All right, and when I click edit, we get details method not allowed. Okay, and the reason I brought us to a new page was most likely due to this should be a slash. And when we're looking at our edit user-password.html, okay, let's try it now and refresh our application. Okay, so that looks good. Let's start all over and say log out. Let's type in coding with Roby with password test1234 exclamation mark. Go to edit user, and again, I'm going to butcher the password. And we can see that the form was submitted and we get invalid username or password. All right, now let's butcher the username. And click edit. Again, we're getting invalid username or password. And now this time I'm going to pass in our valid username with a valid password, and then I'm going to type in a new password. And there we have it, password updated. However, this is still a red box instead of a green box. So we're going to want to go back and see where we made this coding mistake. Let's close this and go to our edit user password. Scroll up. And here we can see we said if meg equals password update. We need this to say if message. Save that. Let's go back. If I refresh the page, that'll probably just change green. And there we have it. So let's go through it one more time. I'm going to type in the fake password and then a new password. Invalid, and now all real. And then boom, password updated. And now if we go back to our application and log out, it's going to want the new password. And it worked, the new password. So there we have it. So this was a huge assignment. We created a new template where a user can now go to edit user in the nav bar where they get a completely new template. We created the template, and then we created an entirely new routing file which is going to handle all of the users. And for right now, it can only change the password, but there's not really too much else we'd want to do. Maybe a user can delete themselves or something like that, but you can enhance the application however you like. But right now we have a full-fledged application where users can change their password and a whole bunch of fun stuff. So this wraps up this assignment on how we can change a user's password, and I will see you in the next video.